G'day and welcome to Mark chapter 8. I wonder if you've ever read the Bible and been confused. So you read the Bible and you've got lots of questions, or maybe you didn't quite understand it. You're going, I don't know what this is about. I wonder if that bothers you, because I want to suggest that it probably shouldn't. It's probably a good thing, in fact, if that prompts you to study further. But today's Bible reading is good news for the confused. I want to suggest it's good news for the confused because as I read it, I get lots of questions. What was Jesus going on about with the bread and the baskets left over? Why couldn't Jesus heal the guy in one go? Why was Jesus so tough on Peter? I've got lots of questions. So it's good to have questions because I wrestle with them and come to an answer. I've got to, because I've got to say something right now, don't I? But I want to suggest that this passage is good news for the confused because we see the disciples didn't get it and Peter didn't get it. All right? So think about that. The Apostle Peter, who was one of the key leaders in the church, who Jesus appointed to be one of the key leaders in the church, he didn't get it. He got told off for Jesus for thinking about things all the wrong way. It's okay not to get it at first. That's okay. Let's jump in and have a look. Now, it starts off with Jesus again feeding a large crowd. Now, this is something that happened twice. In verse 1 of chapter 8 it says there was again a large crowd. So Mark is very aware that this happened before and it's happening again. It's not a repeat event, it's not the same event. The Bible writers didn't get confused, but people followed Jesus often, and on 2 occasions at least he decided to feed them. All right? So that happens, and that reminds us of that Jesus is not like us. There's something different about Jesus. We talked about that when we looked at the first one, the 5,000 people. So let's move on very quickly and save a bit of time today. Immediately after that, before they've left that area and got in the boat, the Pharisees come out and ask Jesus for a sign. Look at verse 11. The Pharisees came out and began to argue with him, demanding of him a sign from heaven to test him. Now, I just want to notice that this is a negative thing. Look at the 3 negative words there. Argue with him, demanding of him a sign to test him. So they're not coming in good faith like some of us do, like, God, I want to understand, please help me to understand, give me some understanding, send me a sign, show me the way. We should never test God, and asking for signs is tricky ground, but these guys are doing it in bad faith. And I want to show you how true that is by going back to Mark chapter 3 verse 6. We talked about this a little while ago. Jesus is in a synagogue, and the Pharisees are there, and there's a guy there with the withered hand. Do you remember that one? And Jesus made him stand up in front of everyone. And then he turned to the Pharisees and asked them a question. Should I save life or kill? Is it better to heal or to do harm? And the Pharisees didn't answer because they were thinking politically, like, oh, if we say this, he'll use that against us. They weren't caring about the man. So Jesus heals him, and then verse 6, immediately the Pharisees went out and started plotting with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. You see, they saw a sign from heaven. They saw Jesus do something amazing, but they only saw him going against them, and they didn't care about that sign. It didn't change the way they thought. It didn't change their attitude, and that's why Jesus says to them here, I'm not going to give you a sign. He could have said, I've already given you one. What more do you need? But what he's saying is, I'm not going to give you one. It's like when we were kids, when your brother did something quite clever or quite an achievement, he's like, oh, I just popped a mono on my bike. I just did a wheelie. He's like, I didn't see it. He'd say, well, show me. He'd say, I'll show you again. Watch. And you'd watch, and he'd get up there, and then as soon as he dropped it and looked back, you'd kind of turn around and go, no, I didn't see it. I didn't see it or anything. Because there's that brotherly rivalry. Maybe some of you guys didn't have that, but it's like, I'm not willing to see what he just did because it makes him clever, and it's like, oh, I can't do that. And that's the attitude of the Pharisees. I don't want to see. They've got their fingers in their ears and their hands over their eyes. They don't want to see that. They don't trust. So they leave, and Jesus and the disciples get in the boat to go home. And Jesus just gives them something to think about. Verse 15, and this is perhaps one of the 2 most important verses in this chapter. Watch out, beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. Then they keep going. And the disciples don't understand him. So it's okay to not get it at first. It's okay to be confused. It's okay to be working it out. They're discussing amongst themselves, and they're thinking, we haven't got any bread. So that's a big factor in their discussion. Did Jesus say that because we don't have any bread, so we better not go to the Pharisees to get some yeast and buy some bread? And Jesus says, look, don't you get it? Are you thick? Are your hearts hardened? And then he asks them a series of questions to help them understand, which probably we end up being more confused. Well, I certainly was the first time I read it because I'm a maths teacher. So Jesus says to them, look, when I fed the 5,000, how many leftovers do we have? When I fed the 4,000, how many leftovers did? Don't you get it? And I think we misunderstand that because we tend to focus on the details and the specifics because of we live in a very scientific worldview right now. But what we need to do is step back and look at the big picture. And I think what will help you to do that is to put your cranky mum voice on. You know, when you've been nagging mum and she's got under control and she's just like, stop it. So, I don't know, like you've invited a couple of friends over and mum's cooking dinner and you keep saying to mum, is there going to be enough? Is there going to be enough? And mum's saying, there will be enough. There will be enough. And then finally mum says, look, last weekend when I had your 3 big uncles and your 5 big cousins over, I cooked this much, and was there enough? Yes. Put that cranky mum voice on and read what Jesus said again. He says, when I broke the 5 loaves for the 5,000, how many basketful of bread did you collect afterwards? And when I broke the 7 loaves for the 4,000, how many large basketfuls of bread did you collect? He's saying, come on. It's not about the bread. Jesus is saying there's going to be enough. What Jesus is saying to his disciple with those questions is, you don't have to worry about bread. If you were hungry and if we needed to, I could feed you. What I said about the yeast is not about bread. It's not about physical hunger. It's not about physical bread. I'm talking about something else. Jesus is talking about yeast as a metaphor. Yeast is something that you mix into your bread, and overnight, or as you put it in the sun in a warm place, the yeast spreads through the dough and grows. And so what Jesus is talking about is the ideas of the Pharisees and the ideas of Herod. Their ideas, their way of thinking, what their attitudes are. Jesus is saying to his disciples, don't let them creep into your heart. Don't let them get into your mind. Don't think like they think. Don't do what they do. And I think if you think about it, when Christians have done the worst job of being Christians, when we look back through history and Christians have been on crusades that killed people, or Christians have been part of injustices, it happened because we were most like the world. We were letting the thinking of the world, or the thinking of religious self-righteousness, human religion, human politics and human power, we were letting that shape the way we behaved. So the Catholic Church at its worst was no different to the princes of Europe at their worst. Palaces and concubines and parties and all that's nothing to do with what the church should have been about. Even in our own Australian history, when Christians stood up against the Darwinian ideas of the time and said, no, Indigenous people are created in God's image. They're our brothers and sisters. Christians preserved the languages, protected Indigenous people from extermination, stood up for them and treated them like brothers and sisters and wanted them to know the love of Christ. When Christians forgot that and started thinking in the Darwinian terms, in the yeast of Herod, they started thinking about measuring people by how much money they had, how much education they had, how literate they were, all those things. Christians took part in the stolen generation and were part of that because we started measuring people not according to what Scripture says is important, but what our human worldly thing said was important. When Christians are like the world, human power, human politics, human religion, human effort, we get it wrong. And that's what Jesus is saying. Be careful of thinking how the world thinks. And we need to be careful of that right now with coronavirus. We need to obey the government restrictions because we love and we want to serve our neighbours. And I don't want to be someone who transmits it to someone and harms them that way. But I'm not afraid like I've seen other people be afraid. I'm not scared because to live is Christ and to die is gain. We don't have to panic. There can be a pandemic. There doesn't have to be a demographic panic because we know that God has us in our hands. We will love, we will serve, but we can do it calmly. Do you see the difference? It's like we don't think like they think. We think differently. Even when sometimes we end up doing the same thing, we're thinking differently, we're feeling differently, we have different values. Beware of the yeast of the Pharisees and the yeast of Herod. They move on from there, they come to Bethsaida, and the question that I have now is, how come Jesus can't heal this guy in one go? Because you look at what happens, he takes the blind man out of the village, spits on his eyes, lays hands on him, and says, do you see anything? And here we get the first historical reference to Ents. You know, the Ents of J.R.R. Tolkien, The Lord of the Rings. I see people, they look to me like trees walking. No, it's not. That was just a little thing for the nerds amongst us. That's not what it is. It's the guy can't see properly. I don't know whether Jesus kind of fixed the cornea in his eye but forgot to kind of fix up the optical nerve, or I don't know what it is, but Jesus lays hands on him, the guy can see partly, and then Jesus lays hands on him again and he can see clearly. The question we've got to ask is, why did it take Jesus 2 goes? And there's basically 2 answers to that. One is Jesus made a mistake, or he wasn't able to, that somehow Jesus messed up on the first go. And I think it's okay to think about that for a while. I don't mind if the more cynical amongst you or think about that for a while. For me, that's not the answer, because in the previous section there was a Syrophoenician woman who came and said, look, my daughter's got a demon, and with a word from a distance, Jesus gets rid of that demon. The same thing in another situation, Jesus said to the guy, go home, your daughter's okay. So Jesus can heal from a distance. Jesus doesn't need to touch. Jesus doesn't need 2 goes at this. So my conclusion is that Jesus did it on purpose. And then the question is, why? And whenever I'm perplexed about what Jesus has done, I ask myself, is it a teaching moment? Why did Jesus do that? Why did Jesus call the Syrophoenician woman a dog? It's a teaching moment. I get it. So what's the teaching moment here? And here's some smart people who I read their books have helped me. One guy drew out a parallel between what Jesus does with the guy who can't see and Peter. Did you notice that? The guy can see the outline. Oh, I see people, dark and light. I can see the movement. I can see the outline, but they look more like trees than people. He can see the outline, but the detail's wrong, right? That's what this guy can see. And that's what happens for Peter. And so I think this is a demonstration of what's going on for Peter. Because in the next section, one of the most important things in the whole of Mark's Gospel, Jesus asks his disciples, who are people saying I am? The people are talking about me. What do they say? And, you know, because Jesus is doing amazing things and speaking with authority, they say, oh, maybe you're John the Baptist come back and kind of extra power because you come back from the dead. Or maybe you're one of the prophets, or that big prophet Elijah. And Jesus says, but what about you guys? Who do you say I am? What do you think? And here, really important, Peter answered him, you are the Messiah. Peter gets it right, okay? Peter says, you're the king. You're the one God sent to save us. You're going to bring people back to God. I see the outline. I see the movement, where it's going. But unfortunately, Peter gets the detail wrong. And he gets the detail so wrong that it's almost like they're trees, not people. Because in verse 31, Jesus began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, the scribes, be killed, and rise after 3 days. He was talking about this openly, plain, bluntly, saying, look, this is what's going to happen, fellas. I'm going to be rejected, and they're going to treat me cruelly, and it's going to be very terrible. Then I'll die, but I'll rise again. And Peter takes him aside and begins to rebuke him. Peter says, no. You're the Messiah who's going to come and save us. You're the Messiah who's going to come and bring people to God. See, Peter sees that outline, and that's his idea of the Messiah. And I think he's thinking with a bit of Herod ideas, a bit of people power, human power. So he's thinking maybe with armies, with leaders, with political movements. Or maybe he's got a bit of Pharisee thinking. He's thinking of setting up an alternative temple, and we're going to have a new religion, like we're going to we're going to cleanse the temple and we're going to do it differently, but he's still thinking in the same kind of power structures. He's thinking in human terms, and we know that because Jesus tells him off and says, you're not thinking about God's concerns but man's. So I think what's happening is the yeast of Herod and the yeast of the Pharisees has actually crept into Peter's thinking a little bit. And Jesus says, get behind me, Satan. When Peter says, no, but you can't be killed, because then what will happen to, you're the leader of our army, you're the one who's going to save us, you're the one who's going to bring about this huge change. Peter is thinking in human terms. And Jesus says, no, you're thinking wrong. What Jesus says is really quite interesting. Turning around and looking at his disciples, he made sure the disciples were included in this. Part of this, understood that he was rebuking Peter. Jesus wanted the disciples to understand, this is not what my kingdom's going to be about. This is not who the Messiah is. You've got the wrong shape. You see the outline, but you've got the details wrong, so wrong that you're going in the wrong direction. He rebuked Peter and said, get behind me, Satan. Because you're not thinking about God's concerns, but man's. That's a little interesting insight there. I think when he says, get behind me, Satan, he's emphasizing, I don't know that Peter was possessed so much as what Jesus is saying is, whenever you stop thinking about God's things, God's way, and start thinking about things in human way, Satan's there helping you to do that. That's what Satan wants you to do. You see, Satan would have Jesus turn away from the cross and choose the human power, the religious power kind of way to go. That's what Satan would love. But Jesus says, no, God's way is not armies, it's not human power, it's not politics, it's not religion, it's not self-help program, it's not thinking you're better than other people. God's way is love and service and forgiveness. And Jesus is going to purchase that for us on the cross. God's way is to send someone to show us, but also to save us by dying to pay for our sin. And quite frankly, if Jesus didn't die on that cross, everything else he did would have been to no purpose. There would have been no value in it. Because it's the dying on the cross that takes our sin away. It's the dying on the cross that brings us back to God. It's the dying on the cross that makes us God's friends and brings us back into God's kingdom. That's where the kingdom of God happens. A kingdom not made by killing others, like those human religions do all over the world. A kingdom not made by stomping over others, which is what human governments do. Taxes and fines and threats. But it's a kingdom made by serving, by loving, by giving, by dying for others. And Jesus says, that's God's way. Don't think in man's way. Peter, you're getting it wrong. You're doing what Satan would have you do. And you're thinking in terms of the Herod's way and the Pharisees' way. You're thinking in human ways. I think that's going to be a real encouragement to us, because that gives us the answer, the key to understanding how we can find our answers. You see, it's okay to be confused. It's okay to have questions, but we want to be moving forward. And this part gives us the answer to how we do that. So, 2 encouragements for you to finish off this section this morning. It's okay not to know everything yet. All right? It's okay to have questions. It's okay to have fuzzy stuff on the edges of what you believe. That's okay. It's okay to still be learning and kind of like, I don't know how that bit of the Bible fits with that bit of the Bible. Work on that. That's okay. You don't have to have all the answers. You are not saved by what you know and what you understand. There's not an exam to get into heaven. You're saved because you trust in Jesus. That's it. I knew the guy who topped the New South Wales Baptist Sunday School exams for a couple of years in a row. I'm talking 25 years ago when they still used to do that thing. The Sunday school had a curriculum, and if you taught that curriculum, there was an exam at the end of the year which you could apply to do and post away your results. And someone came first, and he got the prize a couple of years in a row. A couple of years later, he finished high school, went off to university, and stopped following Jesus. And looking back, I think he was only ever going to church because his parents made him. I think the guy was not a Christian. He's not saved. Something might have happened since then. I'm talking 25 years ago. I hope it would. I liked the guy. But the knowledge, because he was a smart guy, he could top the Sunday school exams. But it didn't save him. It's faith that saves him, and you don't have to have all the answers and all the questions and tick all the boxes to be saved. You just have to follow Jesus. There's some things you've got to get right, and that's what this second thing is for. The second encouragement is that it's always going to be about Jesus. It's always going to be about the grace of the cross. That's what Jesus' big rebuke there to Peter is. Get behind me, Satan. You're not thinking about the things of God, but the things of men. All right? So a good question for us to ask is, who's saving us? Who's saving you? Who are we looking to for help? Are we looking to us? Are we looking to politics, to education, to something human? Or are we looking to God? We've got to be careful of those teachings that start to make it all about us. Claim this, you can do it, you do this, you do that. We've got to be careful of those because it's Jesus who saves us on the cross. And it's a crucified Saviour we follow. That's the good news. The second thing is, a good question to ask yourself is, who is glorified? Who's made bigger? Who's made more important? Who looks good in this? Is it me looking good? Then it might not be from God. Does it make humans look good? Is there someone who kind of comes off looking better? So let's work really hard and we look great and we're better than other people. That's not going to be Christian. That's going to be human religion. So does Jesus get glorified? Do we realise, wow, I need Jesus more than ever because I need him to save us, and he's a more loving, more gracious, more wonderful than I ever imagined. He looks better. I love him more. Then you're on track. So that last thing Jesus said helps us to kind of find a path towards greater wisdom, greater understanding, greater knowledge, is that we keep it all about Jesus. We keep glorifying Jesus and we keep trusting in that it's Jesus who saves us, not us, not some other thing. That's what it's got to be all about. And as we move forward, trusting Jesus, proclaiming Jesus, keeping Jesus in the middle, the things will get sorted out. And some things it doesn't matter. I disagree with Christian brothers that I love about all sorts of issues. And that's okay because they're all out on the edges. We agree about this thing. We're saved by Jesus and what he did on the cross. The Son of Man must be rejected by the religious leaders. He'll be treated cruelly. He'll be killed. And then he'll rise on the third day. And in that resurrection, that's our hope. In that death to take away my sin, that's our hope. Brothers and sisters, I hope this has encouraged you that it's okay to be growing, to be learning. You don't have to understand everything right at once. But I hope it also encourages you to keep digging into that truth, that Christ loves us, that Christ died for us, and that in his resurrection we are raised to life, and we live out that life now. May God bless you as you think about this week. God bless you. God bless you.